Hello and welcome to Building an Effective Governance and Compliance Strategy using AWS Audit Manager. I'm Michael Stringer, a Security Specialist Solutions Architect with the ANZ Public Sector team. I spend a lot of time in conversation with AWS customers about how to audit and continuously evaluate their workloads for compliance to a particular governance framework. For example, Australian financial services customers. They build workloads that need to comply with controls recommended in the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority Guidance Document CPG 234 for information security, and that helps compliance with the CPS 234 standard. Many Australian public sector customers, particularly federal and state agencies, build workloads on AWS that comply with the Australian Cyber Security Centre Information Security Manual for handling data classified up to protected level. New Zealand customers also have localised compliance and regulatory frameworks, such as the New Zealand ISM for government agencies and the Council of Financial Regulators for Financial Services. Today we are going to look at a new service designed to help risk and compliance teams, AWS Audit Manager, a service that is intended to be used by non-IT risk and governance staff in your organisation, which makes it easy to prepare, collect, audit and report on compliance services and applications built using the AWS cloud. In this presentation we will cover the following items: how you can move from a largely manual audit process to an automated one, built using the speed and agility of the AWS cloud. I'll provide an overview of the new AWS Audit Manager service, which leads to a deep dive into the benefits and working components, including how to select controls and frameworks, and use them to assess and audit services built in AWS. I'll then walk through how to build a custom framework, by which you can adapt AWS Audit Manager for local compliance and regulatory frameworks, or even your own in-house ones. I'll provide a demonstration of how this works using the AWS Audit Manager service. I'll answer some common customer questions, and then I'll point you to some helpful resources to help you get started. So the Institute of Internal Auditors Australia defines risk as the possibility of an event occurring that will have an impact on the achievement of objectives. For those of you who are working daily in a risk and governance role, you know the real-world impact, both to reputation and to organisation function. Over time, the requirement to adhere to one or more compliance frameworks only increases as a function of the breadth and depth of your IT services and application offerings. Your organisation may already have a well-established risk and governance team in place, with clearly understood auditing controls and documentary procedures. However, in most organisations today, this is still a largely manual information gathering process. Now your organisation is embracing the agility and speed of AWS to deliver new service offerings to your users. It can seem daunting at first when approaching from a traditional paper-based audit mindset. But once you learn more about monitoring, auditing and compliance in the AWS cloud, you discover that the core strengths of cloud computing, such as automation, granular auditing tools and built-in compliance, will actually make your job easier than ever. The Institute of Internal Auditors Australia recommends the 3 lines of defence combined assurance model, and it is in widespread use in corporate and public sector organisations today. One of the key benefits of AWS is that we provide services to help you manage assurance at all 3 levels. In many organisations, it is typical to have the first and second line of defence managed by DevOps, IT and security teams. The third line of defence belongs to the risk and governance team. The first line of defence is concerned with management controls and generally has a real-time focus. It is aimed at review of governance and compliance arrangements to demonstrate checks and balances are working effectively. AWS services in the first line of defence category are AWS CloudTrail for API call logging and auditing, AWS Config for tracking configuration changes over time, AWS Control Tower, which provides an easy method to roll out a multi-account strategy meeting AWS best practices, and AWS License Manager for tracking application licensing. The second line of defence centres on risk oversight and involves some degree of real-time activity with a mandate to review first line of defence activities. This encompasses the work of specialist areas like risk management, technical and regulatory compliance, and safety. It aims to confirm the effectiveness of governance and compliance arrangements and to identify and action improvements. AWS services in the second line of defence category are Amazon CloudWatch for monitoring and alerting on metrics issued from applications and services, and AWS Security Hub, which provides a comprehensive view of your security state in AWS. The third line of defence involves independent assurance that evaluates the adequacy and effectiveness of both first-line and second-line risk management approaches. This is typically undertaken by internal auditors to independently confirm governance and compliance effectiveness and to recommend improvements. AWS Audit Manager is a new service built to assist risk and governance teams with the third line of defence. AWS Audit Manager helps you continuously audit your AWS usage to simplify how you assess risk and compliance with regulations and industry standards. AWS Audit Manager automates evidence collection to reduce the all-hands-on-deck manual effort that often happens for audits and enables you to scale your audit capability in the cloud as your business grows. With AWS Audit Manager, it is easy to assess if your policies, procedures and activities, also known as controls, are operating effectively. When it is time for an audit, AWS Audit Manager helps you manage stakeholder reviews of your controls and enables you to build audit-ready reports with much less manual effort. AWS Audit Manager's pre-built frameworks help translate evidence from cloud services into auditor-friendly reports by mapping your resources to the requirements in industry standards or regulations. You can also fully customise a framework and its controls for your unique business requirements. Based on the framework you select, Audit Manager launches an assessment that continuously collects and organises relevant evidence from your AWS accounts and resources, such as resource configuration snapshots, user activity, and compliance check results. There are 5 main benefits to using AWS Audit Manager. Easily map your AWS usage to controls. AWS Audit Manager provides pre-built frameworks that map your AWS resources to control requirements, which are grouped in accordance to the requirements of an industry standard or regulation. You can fully customise these pre-built frameworks and controls to tailor them to your unique needs. You can also define your own custom controls and frameworks, allowing you to adapt AWS Audit Manager to any formal or internal governance standard. Save time with automated collection of evidence. AWS Audit Manager saves you time by automatically collecting and organising evidence as defined by each control requirement. Instead of manually collecting evidence, you can focus on reviewing it to ensure your controls are working as intended. Always be prepared to produce audit-ready reports. An audit-ready report includes a report summary file that contains links to the relevant evidence folders, which are named and organised according to the controls that are specified in your assessment. The evidence Audit Manager continuously collects from AWS services you use becomes a record containing the information needed to demonstrate compliance with control requirements. You can review and select the relevant evidence to include in your final audit report. Ensure assessment report and evidence integrity. AWS Audit Manager securely stores evidence in its own managed storage repository with read-only permissions to your end users. When you generate audit-ready reports, Audit Manager produces a report file checksum, so you can validate that the report evidence remains unaltered. Both the summary report and evidence can be downloaded to share with your auditors. Streamline collaboration across teams. You can assign controls in your assessment to a subject matter expert to review. For example, you might delegate a security control to a network security engineer to confirm the evidence properly demonstrates compliance. Audit Manager also allows team members to comment on evidence, upload manual evidence, and update the status of each control. AWS Audit Manager is available in the Sydney region for you to start using immediately. AWS Audit Manager offers pre-built frameworks that cover a range of compliance standards, and they are developed with AWS best practices in mind. These frameworks help map your AWS resources to the requirements for industry standards and regulations. Pre-built frameworks in AWS Audit Manager are listed here. AWS will be continually expanding the list of pre-built frameworks based on customer feedback. Local frameworks are a priority for 2021. So let's examine in more detail the evidence sources used by Audit Manager. User activity logs. As an example, using the PCI DSS standard, a customer needs to show the auditor the relevant logs capturing user activities related to the encryption policy change of an EBS volume that's containing cardholder data. To generate this evidence, Audit Manager scans CloudTrail logs to capture EBS API calls, such as disable EBS encryption by default, including user IDs and affected EBS volumes. Compliance checks for resource configuration. AWS Security Hub monitors controls defined by the CIS AWS Foundation's benchmark. One control is CIS 1.6. Ensure IAM password policy requires at least one lowercase letter, with a pass or fail finding, which Audit Manager collects as evidence for each account in scope for a CIS Foundations audit. For manually uploaded evidence, this could be organisation charts, written narratives on people's roles and responsibilities, training records, and documentation of operational procedures. So collecting evidence from AWS services is an automated process. First, AWS Audit Manager collects log data from services such as AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config, and AWS Security Hub. AWS Audit Manager then converts the raw evidence from each service's particular file and logging schemas into a universal format to normalise the data. The user then selects which collections of evidence are relevant for a particular audit. And lastly, the user selects the controls and frameworks needed to build an assessment, and AWS Audit Manager maps the evidence to the controls on your behalf. An AWS Audit Manager assessment report summarises the evidence that has been collected. It also contains links to the evidence folders that hold the supporting evidence. You can generate an assessment report from an active AWS Audit Manager assessment, and the assessment report is placed in your specified Amazon S3 bucket. An assessment report contains two parts. The assessment summary, and this is a PDF report that lists all of the controls and a summary of the evidence collected for those controls. It also provides links to point you to the related folders that contain the evidence files for each control. And the evidence files. These files are grouped into folders that are named and organised based on the control shown in the assessment report. An evidence file contains the content of one evidence item in PDF format. The assessment report summary provides details such as the account included, services in scope, and the controls used, along with many other details. The evidence files contain a full audit and compliance record of the types of evidence collected and their status. When you generate assessment reports for your audit, AWS Audit Manager produces a report file checksum so that you can validate that the report evidence remains unaltered. You can download the report to share evidence with your auditors. AWS Audit Manager has partner organisations ready to assist customers with audit compliance. These range from partners that provide pre-built compliance frameworks for use in AWS Audit Manager, to partners that use the service as part of the compliance auditing work they perform on behalf of customers. AWS Audit Manager enables you to build your own framework using either custom controls or AWS managed controls, which help you meet your audit requirements. Customizing an Audit Manager framework helps you evaluate controls in your environment for compliance with your particular business requirements. You can define custom controls to collect evidence from specific data sources to help show you are meeting internal audit and compliance requirements. Each piece of evidence becomes a record containing the information you need to demonstrate compliance with requirements specified by a control. APRA published an Information Security Standard, CPS 234, as well as guidance to help organisations with implementation of the standard, CPG 234. Many local Australian financial institutions run applications and services in the AWS Sydney region that are required to meet this standard. Customers needing to comply with the CPS 234 standard can build a custom framework in AWS Audit Manager that maps to controls based on the guidance defined in CPG 234. The ACSC published regular updates to the Information Security Manual, which is a standardised set of risk and compliance controls that should be implemented by public sector entities handling data classified at particular classification levels. AWS currently has 97 services assessed for handling data at the protected level and below. There are many federal and state agencies running ISM-protected workloads on AWS today, and it is important to be able to independently verify audit controls. Now you can use AWS Audit Manager to automate the process by building a custom framework. The best way to gain an understanding of the power and ease of AWS Audit Manager is to see it in action. I'll now demonstrate the key features of the service to show you how to build a custom framework for APRA CPG 234, and also how to build a custom control used to audit a compliance check for ACSC ISM Protected. For our demo, we will walk in the footsteps of Angela, who is responsible for internal risk governance at an Australian financial services company. Her company uses multiple AWS services and has deployed workloads conforming to APRA CPS 234. She is interested in best practices and wants to assess the compliance posture of her organisation as she prepares to collect evidence for an upcoming internal compliance audit. It's important to note that Angela's role is a business function. She is not an IT person and does not work with the AWS console or AWS services on a daily basis. Angela starts here on the AWS Audit Manager homepage. The service page provides a summary of the service functionality, how it works, pricing, and provides useful links, for example, to AWS documentation and to frequently asked questions. Angela needs to create a custom framework for APRA CPS 234, as it is not yet one of the pre-built frameworks available in the AWS Audit Manager service. First, Angela clicks on the left-hand menu and chooses Framework Library. Angela then chooses the Custom Frameworks tab and clicks on Create Custom Framework. Angela gives the framework a title, APRA CPS 234. She then gives it a compliance type description, FSI compliance. Angela can add an optional description. This is a custom framework for APRA CPS 234. And finally, Angela can add a tag for related reference to this framework. The key will be framework and the value APRA. Angela then clicks on Next. Angela can now add controls to a control set. She can select standard controls already available in AWS Audit Manager, or create specific custom controls if needed. We will give the control set a name, APRA CPS 234 control set. Angela can then select some examples from the standard control set. You may add up to 25 standard or custom controls to a control set, and you can create up to 10 targeted control sets for a framework, so for a total of 250 controls. Angela now clicks on Add to Control Set, and then clicks again to confirm. Now she clicks Next. Angela can review the framework details and click on Create Custom Framework. Back at the Framework Library page, Angela can choose the newly created custom framework and select Create Assessment from Framework. Today, Angela is setting up an assessment to understand the readiness of her organisation for the internal APRA compliance audit that is coming up. She will specify a name and description, for example, what is this assessment for, and select a destination where data from this assessment should be stored for later download or access. For the purposes of this demo, we've already created an S3 bucket to store the assessments. Once the basic parameters of the assessment are defined, Angela can choose a pre-configured framework or create a custom framework. AWS Audit Manager offers a library of pre-built frameworks that can be used as is, or customised for your unique requirements. In this demonstration, Angela will be using the custom framework she created earlier for APRA CPS 234. She will also add a tag so she can easily find assessments and controls using this tag later on. Report CPS 234. In the next step, Angela needs to select the accounts in which we will run this assessment. We will use the current account. The accounts that are available for assessment are determined by the initial setup of AWS Audit Manager, as done by the administrator of the customer's primary AWS Organizations account. Assessments can be run on single accounts, or if the customer is using the AWS Organizations service, they can run assessments for multiple accounts. Changing permissions for accounts to include in assessments can be made at any time in AWS Organizations. In the next step, Angela needs to select the specific services to include an assessment. The selected framework lists all the AWS services that AWS Audit Manager collects evidence from. None are selected by default. The more services you include, the more evidence AWS Audit Manager collects. For Angela's assessment, she knows that the workload that needs to be checked for compliance is using the following services: Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud for computing services, Amazon Simple Storage Service to store data files, and Amazon Relational Database Service for the database. In a real-world deployment, Angela would need to consult with her internal AWS architecture teams to get a comprehensive list of services to include for assessment. Now that Angela has selected the services to include in this assessment, she can specify audit team members who will have permissions to update the assessment and customise the framework and the controls used. She will select from a list of users who are mapped with permissions to use Audit Manager. Users can be granted different permission sets such as Full Administrator, Audit Manager, or Read Only. The user accounts and permission policies are configured in AWS Identity and Access Management. For this demonstration, Angela has a pre-configured account called Angela Audit Manager, which has an attached policy allowing full administrative control in AWS Audit Manager. In a production environment, you would limit access depending on the user's business requirements. Angela clicks on Next. The last step for Angela is to review and make any final changes before launching the assessment by clicking on Create Assessment. Once the assessment is created, AWS Audit Manager automatically starts collecting evidence from the selected AWS accounts and services. It may take up to 24 hours before you will start to see evidence being populated. Now Angela can monitor assessments she has created. On this page, the first section is a summary panel that shows the details of the assessment, including the evidence that is getting collected. Scrolling down, Angela can see the control status summary, and she can look at details of the controls themselves. The controls are organised into logical groupings called control sets that allows easier delegation to team members for review and commentary. In this example, 10 controls are organised into one control set. Angela can select the control set to see the detailed list of controls in it and click on any control to see the full control details. She can also delegate the review of the control set to a subject matter expert if needed. Each tab highlights relevant aspects of the assessment report. For example, the Assessment Report tab shows the evidence that is selected to be added to an assessment report. The AWS Accounts tab summarises accounts included. And the Audit Owners tab shows you who are the co-owners of the assessment. Angela can review the tags, and she can also review all actions that have happened on this assessment from the Changelog tab. Finally, she can go back to the top of the page and choose to either edit an assessment or to make it inactive if she doesn't want to run it anymore. Let's look at a control in more detail. On this page, Angela can review the summary of the control, including testing information on the data sources it is mapped to. Further down on the page, she can see evidence organised into folders for easy review. In the other tabs, Angela can see the exact data source mapping, comments that were added to this control, and the changelog for this control. Now let's take a look at what is inside an evidence folder. Inside the evidence folder, Angela can review the specific evidence. Note that evidence is labelled with the time when this data was snapshotted. From this page, she can also add manual evidence to the folder, or select this evidence to be added to an assessment report. Angela can view the detailed evidence by clicking on the hyperlink with the time label. This brings Angela to the evidence details screen. She can see the timestamp and other details, as well as information on collected attributes and resources. This evidence can be added to the assessment report. Angela now returns to the assessment detail summary. Assuming Angela is happy with what she has here, she can now generate an assessment report by going to the Assessment Report Selection tab and clicking on the button. She'll be asked to specify the details of the report. Report generation can take several minutes. Let's look at an already completed report by selecting Assessment Reports from the left-hand menu, choosing a complete report and clicking on Download. This report is available for download as a zip file. This zip file can be extracted to see the assessment report in a PDF format. and also contains individual evidence data as PDFs. This allows Angela to complete her task of collecting and reviewing evidence to evaluate for the readiness for her upcoming audit. Angela has now produced an assessment report for an internal compliance audit. Before we complete the demo, let's create a custom control. You can add custom controls designed to measure compliance with a custom framework, such as APRA CPS 234 or ACSC ISM Protected. You could also build custom controls that align with an internal standard used only within your organisation. Here on the control library screen, we click on Create Custom Control. In this example, I'm going to create a custom control for the ACSC ISM Protected compliance standard. Specifically, a control that checks whether CloudTrail logging is enabled. We give the controller name, ISM Protected CloudTrail Enabled, then a control description. And this control checks that CloudTrail is enabled in AWS accounts. You can also optionally add a detailed description of the testing information for the control and add tags. Now we can select whether to automate evidence collection, such as that generated by a service like AWS Config or AWS Security Hub, or use manual evidence that we could attach by uploading to the assessment report later. We're going to use an AWS Config Manage rule for our check. So we select compliance checks for resource configurations from AWS Config. In the Specify an AWS Config rule dropdown, we will choose CloudTrail Security Trail Enabled. Note that you could attach up to 10 data sources to the one control. In this example, we will stick with a single check, and then we will click on Next. You have the option to define an action plan if a particular control has not been fulfilled. Use this to pre-populate remediation steps suited to your organisation. Then click on Next. Now we can review our control configuration, and once we are satisfied, click on Create Custom Control to save. We've now created our own custom control. As noted earlier, each custom control can have up to 10 data sources mapped to it, which allows your organisation to verify a control's compliance via multiple independent methods. That was a quick overview of the AWS Audit Manager service. As you can see, it is fully extensible and customisable to meet your organisation's compliance needs. Let's answer some common customer questions. Can Audit Manager create assessments across multiple AWS accounts? Yes, AWS Audit Manager supports multiple accounts via integration with AWS organisations. AWS Audit Manager and AWS Organizations integration enables you to run an AWS Audit Manager assessment over multiple accounts and consolidate evidence into a delegated administrator account. How can I review a completed assessment? In Audit Manager, you can get a summarised view of your assessment that you can review at any time. The summary contains your assessment details, controls, assessment reports, AWS accounts and scope, AWS services and scope, audit owners, tags, and change logs. Can I delegate a control set or assessment for review by domain experts? Yes, an audit owner in AWS Audit Manager can get assistance from a subject matter expert to help review controls and evidence. The delegate would then review the evidence, add comments, upload manual evidence, and update the control status for each of the controls in the control set. Finally, the audit owner can check the control set and related comments after it has been reviewed and submitted, before indicating the review is complete for the control set. How does Audit Manager provide reports on the assessments that are completed? An assessment report is a finalised document generated from an AWS Audit Manager assessment. The report summarises the relevant evidence collected for your audit. The report links to the relevant evidence folders, which are named and organised according to the controls that are specified in your assessment. Where does Audit Manager store evidence data? AWS Audit Manager stores evidence in its own managed storage repository with read-only permissions to your end users. AWS Audit Manager allows you to generate assessment reports, which contain a summary document and evidence folders in your S3 buckets. Here are some resources to get you started, including the main AWS Audit Manager website, details and features and pricing, a link to the service documentation, and a Getting Started guide. To help with local compliance assessments, we have an AWS Compliance landing page to help you get started. We publish our compliance attestation documentation via the AWS Artifact service, where customers can download reports at any time. For APRA CPG 234, we have a white paper, a recent blog post on guidance, and an AWS Config Conformance Pack of config rules. For ACSC ISM Protected, we have a landing page with more information, a recent blog post, and also an AWS Config Conformance Pack. I hope this quick overview has you excited about how AWS Audit Manager can simplify your organisational compliance auditing requirements. My call to action for you is to do the following. Start using AWS Audit Manager. Try it for yourself and see how you can independently provide an audit trail for workload compliance. Pick a pre-built framework or build a custom framework for localised or internal compliance standards. AWS Audit Manager is designed to be flexible to your needs. Work with internal teams to choose appropriate controls. The DevOps, IT, business functions and security teams will be stakeholders. Automate your continuous compliance assessments. No more reliance on manual processes. And ask your AWS account team for a deep dive and please provide feedback on service improvements and features you would like to see added. You joined AWS Summit to learn, and you can keep learning beyond the Summit with resources from AWS Training and Certification for Security. According to Global Knowledge, IT decision makers report having the most difficult time finding qualified cybersecurity talent, so training has never been more important. We offer more than 25 digital and classroom courses for you and your teams around security, identity and compliance. You can also showcase your expertise by pursuing the AWS Certified Security Specialty Certification. Please visit aws.training/security today to begin your training and certification journey or to update your existing skills. Thank you again for attending, and we really appreciate your feedback so that we can better understand the topics and services you would like to know more about. So please do take the time to fill out our survey and let us know what you think. I'm Michael Stringer, and thank you for watching.